Welcome to the Vinyl Community Pub. Oh shit, no, that's not what we're doing here. But well, I've been wanting to do something with you for a while. Recently, a lot of us did these lists of our favorite American bands, right? Yeah. And I was shocked at the amount of people from the UK chapter of the Vinyl Community responded to that.
Yeah.
And what was a little bit fascinating, but also really annoying, was how almost everyone implied that it's just like, oh yeah, well, even myself, honestly, a little bit, that the UK, the British bands are just better. You know, they're just way better. But the one thing, and this is kind of like my one diatribe, and then I'm going to kind of like, is that, you know, it all comes from here, right? And like specifically, specifically like where I live in the American South, right? Because, you know, quick, not revisionist history, but quick cliff notes of history, right? We come over here to escape religious persecution. It really is just an excuse.
Man, we're going that far back. Okay, carry on.
Yeah. Really just an excuse to colonize, right? We bring over all of these slaves, enslaved people. Yep. We build an economy and a culture on the backs of those enslaved people, and they are really the reason why we have rock and roll, blues, jazz, even bluegrass, because the banjo came from Africa, and it was the banjo mixed with Scotch-Irish tradition, you know, kind of traditional music that kind of made bluegrass, right? And then you guys culturally appropriate all of that shit from us, and create the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and all of that, right? And then people want to be mad at me because I'm not a Queen fan, right? So
yeah, why aren't you a Queen fan, John? That's what I want to know. That's why I'm here today.
I just told you why. So one, I want to know, all of that stuff that I just talked about, is that prevalent in your mind when you, in your relationship to American music? And then like two, when did it start? Like, when did it start for you?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I find it quite strange, a little bit bewildering, the fact that whenever I see American VC channels, they talk so much about the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin.
Sure.
You know, all those bands are good. You know, they all, you know, obviously some of those bands are great, but they're all good. But still, people just hang on to those bands, however many years, 60 years later. And, you know, surely there's got to be a point where we've got to start talking about something else. And as you rightly say, you know, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger, Robert Plant, they will all hold their hands up and say, we stole, we stole the ideas. We were inspired by the American music. You know, so that goes without saying, doesn't it? But from my point of view, and I was thinking about this when you got in touch and you said, oh, let's talk about some of the American stuff that I show, whatever. So I got into music really early as a little kid. And the reason being was that over here in the UK, we have Top of the Pops, right? Top of the Pops it was a weekly music show, half an hour on a Thursday night, you know, and this is back to the early 80s. We only had 3 TV channels, right? So you've got a good chunk of the country watching Top of the Pops at whatever time it was, 7 o'clock or 7:30 on a Thursday night. The family would sit around the TV and we'd listen to the songs that were played on that show. And it was a real diverse mix. It would be everything from heavy metal to pop to soul to novelty records. You know, anything goes, as long as it was on its way up the chart, basically. That was the rule on the show. And I was thinking about this. So when I first started watching that with my family in the early 80s, it was predominantly British bands because, you know, we weren't quite at the video thing yet. MTV hadn't really kicked in. So all of the bands on the show were live in the studio. So of course it's mainly local, UK bands. But I can pinpoint the moment when I thought, I want to get hearing this American music. I can pinpoint the moment when I knew I wanted to go to America, right? And that was 1984, when things seemed to change a little bit because of the video age. And at that time, we had, in the UK, we had pop stars. We had Adam Ant, Boy George, George Michael, all that sort of stuff. You had megastars, absolutely huge artists. Like, I've got some records here. So Michael Jackson, and I appreciate, these didn't necessarily come out in 1984, but around that sort of time. Bruce Springsteen, Madonna, Prince, and there's a CD copy of Purple Rain. So these artists were huge in comparison to what we're seeing on top of the pops, and I suppose it was almost a case that they seemed a little bit exotic. Certainly to me as a kid, it was something that we didn't have here. They seemed to be, bigger than the stars that we had. Their music was everywhere, and that was the appeal for me. So I wasn't around in the 50s and 60s and whatever, when rock and roll came around, whatever. But for me, that was the sort of birth of getting into American pop music.
So that makes a little bit of sense. So it was. But that wasn't how you got into R&B, though. So I know your story about R&B a little bit, but it was the jam.
Yeah, right? Well, I've told this story many times, So it's a combination of things, really, and we'll come on to some of the American bands in a moment. But yeah, so I've always been a big Paul Weller fan. Yeah, the Jam Style Council, like many of these UK VC channels that you see, talking about the same records again and again. Yeah.
Right.
And basically one of their singles has a B-side, which is Move On Up by Curtis Mayfield. And that was where I first heard that song. And, and this is what I realized as I got into soul music in the early 90s, was that a lot of the music I'd heard throughout the 80s, is almost subliminal, that I've been getting into soul music. So the likes of Paul Weller and the Style Council, heavily influenced by soul and R&B. Bands like the Blow Monkeys, Scrittability. There's a massive soul influence there. Yeah. The likes of Dexys. I always have to mention Dexys, as you know. So they had a hit single with Gino, which was all about Gino Washington. Mm-hmm. Soft Cell had massive tunes with Tainted Love, obviously the old Gloria Jones tune, or What by Judy Street. So all of this music, where I didn't understand the link to traditional R&B and soul. When I started listening to the old soul records myself in the early 90s, I could see the link there. I could see the influence that was there for all this music that I loved, all these British bands, and that it sort of made sense to me. It all sort of squared the circle,
So this is something that I've also kind of wondered, because I don't know, and I don't even know if there's a book out there, and you might not even be qualified to answer this. But let's take a movie, for instance, as an example. What is it? The Commitments?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Fantastic fucking film. Was that really a thing? Because that was one of the first places where I kind of saw the link. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I suppose any country, there'll always be a scene, but it's not necessarily, they'll try and copy something. For example, in that case, American soul music.
Yeah.
But what comes out the other end is something slightly different.
Yeah.
So certainly in the 80s, there's a big Brit funk movement. There's a big Brit soul movement.
Yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily liken it to those 60s records, because much of it was done by white artists in the UK. So automatically it sounds very different to those 60s records, albeit in the artist's head, I'm pretty sure they thought they were singing like Al Green or whoever, but what comes out the other end is something very different. So, and then a scene emerges from that. So we definitely had that in the 80s, that sort of Brit soul, Brit funk movement. Yeah. And those records are great, and I love those records. And perhaps certainly the Brit funk sound from the early 80s, it doesn't get talked about enough, and perhaps that's something worth having a conversation about in the future. But yeah, it's that whole thing where there's an influence, people will try and steal it. Even lots of David Bowie. Young Americans trying to make a soul record. What comes out the other side isn't a straight soul record. It's something
Yeah,
slightly
yeah.
quirky, but the influence and the intention is to make a soul record. And so you're talking about, you know, people back in the 60s looking for old blues records. I mean, when you get to the late 60s into the 70s, you've got the Northern Soul scene, which is basically, you know, a handful of clubs in the north of England where you've got people turning up on a Saturday night, dancing to this very formulaic soul sound. It's that four to the floor soul sound.
Yeah.
And it's just basically obscure B-sides, whatever, you know. DJs actively going out trying to find obscure tunes that all fit this formula. Right. And it was massive, you know, in those clubs. It was a specific scene. It didn't sort of hit the charts that much. I mean, there were some modern recordings which had the same vibe going on, which did make the charts. But on the whole, it was just a little scene in this area of the country. And we look back now and, you know, soul fans talk about that. You know, you guys in America talk about Northern Soul as well, where in effect you're talking about a handful of nightclubs in the north of England in 1976 or whatever it was. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we had that, and I've talked about that before. Even when I was with you in Headley, that we had a similar thing with beach music here.
Yeah,
in the States, the beaches of South and North Carolina, the Grand Strand. For some reason, it was like a thing. There was like a radio station or a couple of radio stations that just played R&B music, and it wasn't necessarily obscure songs. Some of them ended up becoming like more regional. And so like that, but it was all based around a certain rhythm, and it spawned a specific dance, you know, and it's all white people, you know, listening to that music, you know, and being fans of that music. So it's a little bit of the same thing. At the risk of adding tension to our diplomacy here, is that there's such like a scoff attitude, like at times to the States, right? Like a little bit. And I guess we offer it back a little bit in some ways too, but such a love of the music that was created here, you know? And I just kind of find that fascinating. It's like a duality that I don't know really exists anywhere else.
There is. I mean, but you know, saying what I said about those records that came out in and around 1984, you know, they made me want to go to the States. And then the more that I listen to music and the more that I find records that are from the States, you know, these old soul records or some of the bands that I'll show some records in a bit, you know. Yeah. You know, hearing that music made me want to go to the States. And I've been lucky enough to go, you know, a number of times to visit and such like. But that's always, you know, that's been the attraction. It's because of the music and the musical history and, you know, where you are there down towards the South. You know, I've traveled around Nashville and Memphis and New Orleans and things like that. And it's just so rich with history. Yeah. As a music fan, it's the most exciting place to be. That, you know, I think anywhere in the world, you know, that's where you want to be to see what's going on, hear the stories, you know, look for the records, you know, however successful you may or may not be. It's just a real buzz, you know.
So you go from Top of the Pops, which I am familiar with, just because of certain like viral videos. How do you go from Top of the Pops? John, did you go to the hair bands? Did you go to the hair bands? I mean, I know you've teased at the extreme thing before.
The thing is though, John, you're asking that question and you already know the answer, don't you?
But I don't know how deep. I don't know how deep you were in it.
Yeah, well, so I was born in 1975, right?
Yeah.
So okay. So when you get to, you know, I don't know, sort of 86, 87, I was 11 or 12 years old, and all those rock bands seemed exciting. You know, they all had this lovely, lovely hair, you know, and they could play the guitar really, really fast.
Yeah.
You know, for a kid, that's quite exciting. And not only did I love some of the American bands, I loved some of the UK bands that sounded like the American bands as well, you know.
Okay,
so 1987, you had the likes of Def Leppard, Hysteria, you know, Whitesnake, 1987. Right. they're great records, whatever. But yeah, I did get into some of the rock stuff. So hang on a minute, what we got here? So I've got a couple of records here by Guns N' Roses, which I love at the time. Right, where are we there? There you go, Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, but let's real quick though. Slight caveat: they're not quite the same thing.
No, they're not the same as White Lion, are they? Or
right? Or Poison?
I mean?
Or
see, Poison.
Yeah.
I did like Poison.
Yeah.
Records like Open Up and Say and Flesh and Blood. They were great albums, John.
Yeah.
I'm not having you not those,
I mean, we all went through it too. And I was born 3 years after you, so like we went through it all too. Some of us just don't like to admit it as much.
I don't know. I mean, I don't mind it, and I'll be honest, I do still listen to some of those records now. And I mean, I've shown them before. I've shown Extreme, and what I find myself doing is going to see some of those bands still. So I've seen Extreme a few times recently, and they're great. It's metal funk. I can cope with that.
Yeah.
Poison. I've never got to see Poison because they've only ever played the UK 3 times.
Wow.
They played the Monsters of Rock Festival in 1990.
Yeah.
They're on the bill there, and they played 2 warm-up shows in Nottingham, not far from me. And those are the only 3 gigs they've ever played in the UK. So there you go, a little bit of information for you there. But yeah.
See, that's when I know that you truly love American music, when you got into that. Okay, because now, how many of your friends were into it too?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Music is tribal, isn't it? Certainly at that age, when you are, I don't know, 15 years old or something.
Yeah,
it's tribal. You tend to listen to the same stuff as your friends. I'm not blaming anybody else. I'm not sort of trying to absolve myself any responsibility here. But I was definitely influenced, John, by. I've always been quite weak-willed,
Yeah,
there you go. But what that did do was get me into some decent rock music, records that I certainly still listen to in around 1990. And I know that you're a fan of these records as well. So Black Crowes.
Yes.
Because the Black Crowes were lumped in with those hair metal bands. Certainly
that was unfair too.
That's unfair, yeah. And that's they were lumped in certainly just because it was rock music. They're all chucked into the same pot. But the Black Crowes in the early 90s made 3 brilliant records for me.
That's still my favorite. That's my favorite.
One of my favorite LPs. And their 3rd album is still good as well. And that's the one with the dodgy sleeve there.
Yeah.
So and they're a band that I still follow now. So I kept on buying, not all of their records, but most of their records. And when the brothers did solo projects, I bought those records. I went to see them live as well. Yeah. And I think I said to you, I think I spoke to you earlier in the year that I went to see them probably April time because they've got a new album out. And I like the new album as well. I think it's good.
It's good.
Yeah.
But I love the Black Crowes.
There's a direct There's a direct link there, with Otis Redding, of course, because the big hit that they had was Hard to Handle, which was an Otis Redding B-side. And again, it's that thing where you actually, when you discover soul music, you can almost look back and think, well, actually, I've been listening to these songs for X amount of years without realizing that they are old soul tunes,
So was it Hard to Handle, or you heard them first and then you realized Hard to Handle was Otis Redding?
Yeah, so I listened to that album to death and only realized it was Otis Redding a year later or something like that,
Did you hear the Faces at all? Did you hear Faces at all?
Yeah, you can hear the faces. Yeah, you can hear the face in Black Crowes, absolutely. And and just from their interviews and listen to record, you do get turned on to that music. Because Rod Stewart, obviously we're talking about, we go on a tangent about a British artist, but those records that he made with the Faces and his solo records from the early 70s are fantastic,
incredible.
Some of the greatest records ever made, but perhaps doesn't get the credit that he deserves because of something sexy and stuff like that, So
I've never really talked about them as much on my channel. It's just, it doesn't come up, but it's just like how much I love Faces. Like I love them. And Black Crowes got me there They got me to them because of talking about them, like in interviews. But then also, it wasn't really until hearing them that I was like, holy shit, Rod Stewart sounds like Sam Cooke.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You weren't like into soul the same way you're into soul now, though, at that time, not in 1990.
No, the reason why I got into soul music is quite simple. So I was, as you very kindly pointed out, I was into all the hair metal bands, and then in September 1991, Nirvana released "Smells Like Teen Spirit," which absolutely killed off everything.
Everything.
You know, it just killed it. You know.
Yeah.
And at that point, you know, a lot of my friends started listening to some of the grunge bands and stuff like that. Some of those records I've got here, I'm going to in a moment.
Yeah, I was going to maybe bring them up later.
Yeah. But what I did, it basically made me stop listening to the hair metal stuff. And at that point, I just went total tangent and started listening to soul music on the back of the Weller connection, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, if Nirvana hadn't come along, I'd probably still be listening to White Lion and Cinderella right now, you know? So,
well, I mean, that's the thing. It like people treat that like it's such a cliche statement these days, but it's really true. Like that's what I tell people. I actually lived through that. Like I actually was listening to some of those shitty bands too. And like Nirvana, I saved my life is the way I look at it, you know, because like I think it was the first kind of stepping point for me at around 12, 13 years old to good stuff, you know, like good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I remember being, what age would I have been then? I'd been 16 or something, and listening to Nevermind. Yeah. And because at that stage I hadn't heard Bleach, so you know I'm not one of the cool kids that knew all the. No. I heard Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Most people are lying when they said they heard Bleach. Yeah, most people are lying.
Absolutely. So, and I remember listening to it, and the CD finishing, and me looking at my CD collection and thinking, I don't want to listen to anything else now. I don't know what else to listen to, you know, and put it on again because it just felt that different. And looking back now, I don't think it is a million miles away from some of the stuff like Guns N' Roses or whatever, you know, production wise.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think production wise, you can hear it a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean, because it's such a drastic difference between Bleach and even In Utero after it, you know. Or I even remember coming across Incesticide and being like, "What is this even the same band?"
Yeah.
Okay, so Nirvana comes along. Was Pearl Jam right after that?
Yeah. So Pearl Jam. So I can almost think about.
You're the only person that talks about Pearl Jam of the British channels that I watch.
Well,
in a like I like them way.
Yeah. All right. So I can almost think about music in sort of periods of my life. You know, there's not much of these periods don't bleed into each other really. So as I say, you've got the hair metal thing, right? Mm-hmm. Then Nirvana comes along, and you know, for a couple of years, you know, I'm listening to Nirvana, Pearl Jam. So obviously 10 good records. Second record, I think, is probably their best for me.
Yeah.
You know, Vitology. They only ever had one top 10 hit over here.
That's fine.
Yeah. Spin the Black Circle was I think got to number 8 or something in the UK. That was their sort of peak over here, really. And I still go and see them live. They're an incredible live band. So I don't necessarily buy the records anymore. My younger sister is a big fan of theirs. So whenever they tour, incredible live band, I'll always go and see them if I can, you know. So
yeah.
Really good. But from that sort of period, the records that I really liked. Now, there's a sort of spin-off band from Pearl Jam, Brad.
Yeah.
This is my favorite album from that period.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, yeah.
I know Brad. I'm not as familiar with that one. It's the one. Actually, I don't even know how many they had. What was it called?
Interiors.
Interiors.
Yeah.
Okay. Interiors was the one that because they actually had a hit from that one, or they had not a hit, but they had an MTV, like they had a video, you know.
Right.
And that guy's voice, there's another,
Yeah.
very soulful voice.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Really different from any of those other, like, I never would have listened to Brad ever at any point and said that they were grunge. I don't know what I would have called them, really.
Yeah.
But like,
so were you listening to it? Was this what you were listening to at this time? Pearl Jam, Nirvana?
oh yeah. So I was listening to, I was, at that point I was all in. So it was just kind of like, okay, now Nirvana's happened. Now I'm into Pearl Jam. Here's the singles soundtrack, which I listened to for I don't know how many years before I ever actually saw the fucking movie. And then, and then it was anything off of that soundtrack or whatever other soundtracks I could find. It was, the Screaming Trees. It was Soundgarden. It was Smashing Pumpkins, even though they weren't from Seattle. It was, all of that stuff. And then it was 120 minutes on MTV.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was what did it for me.
Well, but if we're talking about this period of music, American music, and of that sort of style, you talk about Scott Weiland or Eddie Vedder or Kurt Cobain. I think the best songwriter from that period was Evan Dando. So,
oh wow, okay,
right, yeah. And the reason for that, he just had an ear for melody. Those albums.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's a shame about Ray and this one as well. Is it Come On for the Lemonheads? Yeah, they're just jam packed, full of hooks, songs that get stuck in your head, and great songs that now still stand up. And he had something. He had something a little bit special. Certainly, he had the same issue with drugs and whatever. And it's almost a case of what could have been. Mm-hmm. But that period of music, I think he was a cut above the rest when it comes to songwriting.
Yeah, it's a shame about Ray was huge for me.
Yeah,
but like, did they really make that much of a splash over there?
Well, everybody noticed them because of the Mrs. Robinson cover.
Oh, okay.
But then, but the songs did pretty well. Stuff like "Into Your Arms." The song that I loved at the time was "Big Gay Heart" from this record.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant, brilliant tune.
Yeah.
But it just the strength of the melodies. It didn't quite fit the grunge.
Oh God, no.
Everybody else. It's something slightly different. But
for
that period, he just seemed to have an ear for a tune, And whereas some of the tracks on the grunge stuff just didn't have that melody thing going on. It was more about attitude.
So where does REM come into all this?
Yeah, so I mean, again, you think about my age and how old I was in the 80s. So the first time I remember hearing REM, I think the first time they charted over here would have been Orange Crush from Green.
Yeah.
So of course, people, perhaps reading The NME would have known what was going on with the albums that came before Green, all the IRS stuff. But that's the first thing that I remember hearing of theirs. And then, of course, you go from Green to Out of Time. And, of course, Out of Time was massive. At that stage on MTV.
Yeah, they're big.
It's massive. And then Automatic for People. So those records were huge. And although my favourite of their albums from that period, which is the one that most REM fans hate, is Monster.
No, I love it.
Love it, yeah. So, I like this because it had a slightly heavier sounds. It sounds like them trying to do something a bit different. It's almost a reaction to the success that they had with Automatic for the People. And I saw them on this tour. I saw them play. So the lineup, they were headlining, Radiohead supporting the Cranberries, and I think it might have been Sleeper, first band on. But a great lineup, like a stadium type thing. Brilliant day out. But I've always loved this. I've always had a soft spot for this record, Really good.
I love that record. And it sucks though, because it's so weird, because if I did like a ranking video or something, it would still be like pretty far down, but all their stuff is so fucking good.
Yeah. That's,
what I mean? It's like the thing that I love the most about that record is that, it's like, I remember at the time, I remember some people talking about, oh yeah, they're coming back with a rock record, like no more of the acoustic stuff, which we love it, but it's going to be good to hear a rock record again. And all the fans were like, oh, we're going to get Green or, or whatever. Yeah. And it's not, it's like, no, Peter Buck somehow came up with a whole nother guitar sound, on top of everything. It's still, but it still sounds like REM. Like it's why, because it still has the harmonies.
So where do you go with REM then? If you're going to pull out an REM record, what are you going to pull out?
Yeah, I mean, Automatic for the People is my favorite, my personal favorite. But I still love those IRS years. It's I flip between Automatic and Life's Rich Pageant, like and I just kind of consider them two different eras, so it's kind of hard to pick, But of the IRS years, it's like Life's Rich Pageant's my favorite, and then and then Automatic for the People. But like, I mean, also just even being just a few years younger, there's a difference there, right? It's like people my age were a little bit more accepting of Monster than people that were 4 years ahead of us, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that's also like, I think a lot of people my age, or maybe even a few years younger, it's like Automatic was just huge.
Well, it was huge. It was absolutely huge, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a classic. So I made a mistake with my mentality in the late 90s and the early 2000s, where I was like anti arena shows, kind of, especially in the early 2000s. I was no, I'm only going to clubs. So that would have been the prime years for me to see all these bands that I missed out on, So REM, if I was ever going to see Petty, that was probably the time, never got to see him.
The next record I have here, John.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Petty.
Wildflowers.
All right.
Right. So, yeah, that's my, well, not my entry point to Petty. That's not true. No. So it's probably the album before Into the Great Wide Open. But this album, this is a massive album for me. And if I had to pick sort of my top 10 records of all time, this album would probably sit in there. I've shown this album recently, which is quite a recent pickup.
That's what
she's. Oh, there you go. She's the one. There you go.
See, because that's I didn't even have him down, and I should have, because that's another one. This is another one where you and I have a shared opinion that I don't hear a lot of other people have.
Yeah.
But this record is amazing. This record is great.
It is, yeah. It really is.
Aside from, using that Angel Dream song twice.
Yeah.
And having two versions of Walls. It doesn't even sound like a soundtrack.
No, it doesn't.
It sounds like a it almost just sounds like a concept album almost in a way. Like, I think it's brilliant.
It is. It's brilliant. The two for me certainly go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Because when we go, there you go. Because some of the tracks are taken from the Wildflower sessions with a few new tracks added in. So the opening track, Walls, you can hear Lindsey Buckingham on the backing vocals, and I love that. It's a brilliant song. I think it's
the round thing.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
and how it's not even in time.
Yeah,
like how it breaks in and out of time. It's like brilliant.
So So you've also got the cover of the Lucinda Williams track, Change the Locks, which is a great cover version as well, and a nice nod to Lucinda Williams. Now, there's an instrumental on here, which my wife, when my wife and I got married, Joe actually walked down the aisle to a track from this record.
Yeah.
There's just a little instrumental piece. I think it's called Hope on Board. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so there you go.
That's awesome. I try not to even talk about it in videos as much because I just don't even want to go there. But it's like, I love Petty, but I got rid of almost all of the records.
Did you?
Because
What have you kept? What have you kept?
This is still my favorite. Damn Torpedoes is still my favorite.
Yeah, can't go wrong with that.
And then Wallflowers, and these two are almost hand in hand for me.
Yeah,
I can't even pick between those two. I've always felt like he's more of a songs guy and not an album guy. And I think a lot of times, you know, my theory why I love these records so much is because of Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
Like, as obnoxious as he can be kind of sometimes, he does have this knack for working with somebody, and he kind of gets them to return to their essence, or he gets them to be who they really are. I just felt like a lot of times he never sounded the way he should have sounded, like on record. I don't think producers ever caught him the way that they should have.
Right,
when I got this, I was like, I don't need the records.
Yeah, I get that. Absolutely.
And this is even better because it mixes in like some live stuff and some alternate takes, you know, like it mixes them in with all the other stuff chronologically. Springsteen, talk about Springsteen, because I was going to ask you about him.
Yes, so Springsteen. So it's going back to what I said before, 1984, you know, this megastar. And I always find it interesting whenever people talk about Springsteen, whether it be, you know, in music mags or in the VC, everybody refers to him as being, you know, this man of the people, and, you know, he's speaking to the common man and all that sort of stuff. Well, because he's so American, to me, as I said before, he almost seems a little bit exotic, because I don't know anybody like Bruce Springsteen, right? You know, he's so American. Yeah. And that's part of the attraction for me. I know he talks about, you know, general things, working life and stuff, albeit he's never actually had a job, but that's another story. But I, do you know what I mean? But from my point of view, I like how American he is. That's part of the attraction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. So he's the kind of, for someone that's like me, he's kind of like one of those guys, one of the few that makes you like proud to be an American.
No, I get that.
Everybody knows what his politics are. Yeah. And half the people that love him don't share his politics, and they don't care. They don't care. And especially in the world we live in now, that's a super rare thing.
So what's your go-to Springsteen record?
Well, you see, it's weird because I still say that Nebraska is my personal favorite. Yeah. But if I just want to listen to him, then it's Darkness on the Edge of Town. Like, that's the one I go to.
Okay.
That's the one I go to because it's got a little bit of everything. You know, it's got rock, and it's got, like, you know, kind of the more folky stuff too. The River is a big one too.
Yeah, and I think that'd probably be mine. You know, I'm just looking at Darkness here, you know, so I like Darkness, but The River I think would be my go-to. Now, a few months ago now, there's a guy on Instagram who's just been to see Mazzi's from Leeds, IG Wakefield. He did a couple of books about record collecting. Yeah, you know? Yeah. So he's a massive Springsteen fan, and he's just been over to the States to see a few of the shows. And he put a thing on Instagram basically saying, you know, if The River was to be a single album, obviously it's a 20-track record, this is what my version of The River would look like. Yeah. I don't think people just commented, made a comment, but nobody put together the list, you know? Yeah. And lots of likes and stuff. So I thought I'm going to put together my list. And my list was pretty much the opposite 10 tracks and that he got. And it just made me think at the time, you know, the fact that we all get something different from these records, don't we? Yeah. You know? So, I mean, this is a perfect example because half of it is quite full on rock, you know, catchy rock songs, whatever, which he's perhaps known for. Then you've got this more subtle acoustic songs, which is what I go for. You know.
Yeah, I
Bruce Springsteen. You know.
Yeah, I do too. And like it was actually the song "The River" that was what got me into him at all. So like I just kind of ignored him for a long time because my age, my parents weren't into him, and I just kind of had this preconceived notion about him, right? But then I heard "The River," and I heard it in a movie.
Okay.
And it was just like, okay, there's something to this, So I bought "The River," the album, and the songs that I gravitated to were the kind of the slower ones, the dirgier, darker ones, right?
Yeah.
Although I did like songs like "Sherry Darling." Like "Sherry Darling's" still like an all-time favorite. I love that song.
I went to see him in 2000, the E Street Band in Birmingham, where I live here, and there's 4 of us went along, and our seats were literally on the very back row of the entire arena. Right, we could not be any further from the stage. You're literally knocking on the back door and back wall, So obviously, what we did, we went and bought as many beers as we could carry each.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're there for about a quarter of an hour. This is before the show starts. And a guy comes up to us and says, "How many of you are there?" We said, "There's 4 of us." And he said, "Okay, if you were down the front, would you dance?" Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, And he's like, "Well, do you want to go down the front then?" So he's a tour manager, right?
Holy shit.
We're all so we're all trying to guzzle it. And he said, no, you can take your beers with you, You don't have to do all of these beers in one go, So basically, the first 2 rows of the show hadn't been sold at all, right?
Oh wow!
And he just walked us down to the very front row, center. So I literally had the best seat in the house, literally front row, center. Bruce right in front of me, just 3-hour show. Yeah, incredible.
That's the thing. This is what it's what I've tried to tell people. I have friends that are just like, I get Bruce Springsteen, I respect him and all that. I've just never been able to get into him. And I tell them I've been telling them for 20 years, see him live, it will change everything. It will change everything. I mean, especially if you're front row center. If you walked away from that being like, he's all right. Not for me.
So obviously we guzzled all these beers. So we sit there the band has started and whatever. We're about an hour into the show. My mate next to me, he's absolutely busting for a pee, but he can't go anywhere because Bruce is looking at him.
Yeah, right.
What are you going to do?
Right.
But here you go. But yeah, so I saw him a couple more times. I saw him on the Pete Seeger tour. Where he did
yeah,
which was good. And I saw him several years later on the in the 2000s sometime at a stadium. But what you said about The Rising, I think that's his last great record.
I saw him on that tour, and it was the night after Johnny Cash died, and he came out and he opened with Ring of Fire.
Right.
Like just by himself. And how old was he then? I mean, he was still, over 50, and he was doing freaking somersaults on stage and like grabbing onto that crazy mic stand that they have like rigged for him that doesn't move. It's like bolted into the stage and like went upside down on the mic stand.
Yeah.
At that age, it's freaking bonkers.
Yeah.
He's the man. He's the man. Okay. First musical memory.
My Boy Lollipop by Millie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Temptations or Four Tops?
No, that's hard. That's really hard. I'm going to go with Temptations, but yeah, Temptations.
Okay.
Right, Temptations, go on in.
Okay. Chips, your chips, or American French fries?
Chips.
Okay. All right, fine. James Brown or George Clinton?
George Clinton.
Stax or Motown?
Motown.
Gervais or Izzard?
Gervais.
Favorite curse word?
You don't want me to say it on your channel, mate.
I don't think it's safe on my channel. Say it.
A delight.
Is it really 6-inch?
Digital gramophone makes no sense.